Is this a great game or what? With the Hall of Fame baseball writer Tim Kurkjian. I am Jeff Kurkjian, and we are joined today as our guest, another Hall of Fame baseball writer. Dan Shaughnessy is going to be our guest today.
Right, and my mentor in this business, and even though we don't do anything the same way or the same direction, Dan and I, he taught me everything I need to know about being a baseball writer, and I will forever be indebted.
Yeah, there's so many great stories that we dive into with him from the beginning of your career. And as silly as it sounds, you know, people all the time say, hey, one day I want to be the next Tim Kurkjian. One day I want to do this, that, and the other. So hearing the stories of the beginning of your career, because now you're a Hall of Fame baseball writer, but back then you were just a lowly newspaper writer. I mean, you know, everybody has to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I started as low as you could possibly get. When Dan and I worked together at the Washington Star in DC, my first job was to take race scores over the phone, do high school basketball over the phone. I used to make runs to Roy Rogers to feed all the senior writers and all the veteran staff guys at the Washington Star. One night, Jeff, I went to a local Roy Rogers and I ordered, and I'm not making this up, 20 roast beef sandwiches, 15 cheeseburgers, and like 12 orders of fries. And the poor guy behind the counter asked me, are you going to eat that here or are you going to take it out? Yeah, I'm going to eat it here. I am really hungry.
Was this not the place where they asked you,
Yes.
are you going to eat this here? Or are you going to take it out on the trail?
Yes. We had a buddy who worked at Roy Rogers, and we used to go through the line like 3 or 4 times. So he would have to repeat, are you going to eat this here or out on the trail, which just made us cry. And we would always order French fries because he would always say, would you like a holster of fries with that? And he was so embarrassed, but he got through it because it was his job.
Well, before we get to the takeaways, you know, our last week's episode was at the Little League World Series in Williamsport, one of the greatest places on earth to go as a baseball fan. And our friends at Game Changer hosted us. We had Todd Frazier on. If you're listening to this episode and you missed that interview, you're going to want to go back an episode because it was incredible. But, Dad, they sent us something that is a bit of a viral sensation, and I want to know if you know anything about this. Hold on. Do you know anything about a Stanley Cup?
No. Explain to the old man here.
So Stanley Cups, this is like all the rage with the kids these days. It's just a water bottle, but it keeps your stuff. And this is not an advertisement. We're not sponsored by Stanley Cup, but they sent us Stanley Cups. So next time I see you in person, because we're doing actually this episode virtually, I'm going to give you your very first Stanley Cup, so you can be super basic like everybody else. Like Emily has one.
Is that like a koozie? What was that thing you told me about? What was that?
A koozie, like Bob Cousy. A koozie is what you put over your beer. In fact, I played golf today with our cousins, Dan Fox, Jess Fox, and Jess's husband, Bobby. And I had a koozie in my golf bag to put over my beer, so it keeps your beer cold. No, this is a water bottle, but it's a very fancy water bottle. They're really, really expensive, and like they sell out immediately when they're put in stock with new colors at Target and stuff. So I'm just trying to keep you informed, trying to keep you young and hip, you know, even though you only have one actual hip, one artificial one.
So I've learned about a koozie and a Stanley Cup. Did you have a beer on the round today, Jeff?
I had a couple beers on the round today. Yeah, I had, I think, 3 or 4 beers. I shot a 44 on the front 9, and then the beers kicked in, and I shot a 50 on the back. Not as good.
Well, Jeff, you know, a buddy of mine runs a golf tournament where the number of beers that you drink during the round, you subtract that from your score. So if you shoot an 89 and drink 12 beers on the round, you actually shot a 77. Does that make sense to you?
How come you haven't invited me on this tournament? Because that would be the only time I could actually beat you playing golf, is if I could drink beers.
I have never played in the tournament, and I would not drink a beer while I'm playing, especially in the middle of the day in the heat. I would be totally buzzed after one beer. Look, Jeff, this is a great week. We just finished the Little League World Series. This is a transition week. The first day of school, at least near our house here in Maryland, school has begun. And Labor Day is on Monday. And of course, Labor Day is another milepost of the baseball season where it really, really kicks in what's going to be a fascinating race to the finish in both leagues, wild cards, divisions, everything. So this is just a marvelous week as far as transitions go to the next level.
Yeah, what kind of takeaways do you have right now on what's going on in Major League Baseball?
Well, the Little League World Series is still the takeaway, even though it ended on Sunday and here we are on Tuesday. It was so good. Now, you watched the championship game. I was taking care of your of your niece and your nephew, Carson and Emma, so I didn't get a good look at it. Tell me what happened in Williamsport on Sunday.
Well, I think before we get to that, we have to start a GoFundMe for my sister and her husband to get cable when it's not just the football season, so you can actually have cable on TV when you're watching the kids. Mark is my brother-in-law's a classic. I only have cable, and I know a lot of families. The Petersons did this growing up across the street on Tally Lane. This is a chronic football household where they only have cable, 7 months out of the year during the football season.
Yeah. So, I watched Despicable Me today instead of the Little League World Series, which I love, and I missed a great game. So it was amazing. Lake Mary from Florida won the whole thing.
Yeah. Real quick, before we get to that, can you give me your best minion? Your best minion from Despicable Me?
No, but as you know, I dressed up as Dr. Nefario, which for Carson's second birthday, and I looked exactly the part with everything, and he was only 2, so when I walked in dressed as Dr. Nefario, I scared the life out of him because I looked so real. I had to take it off and say, hey, it's me, it's Pop-Pop.
Yeah, that was a really good costume. We'll have to get the picture up on social media. And I wish we still had photos of you as Steve from Blue's Clues back during my 4th birthday or whatever that was. That was pretty great. Little League World Series, I'm sorry. We're kind of all over the place today, but it's a good reason. You're right. It's a transition time. Lake Mary, Florida, big shout out. What an incredible game. It goes to extra innings, right? In the 7th inning, which would be the first of the extra innings, there's no runner added to the bases, right? And not until the 8th inning. And the game ends, Dad. A great shutdown inning from the pitcher for Lake Mary, Florida, who was out sick the day before. And he comes in to be the winning pitcher of the Little League World Series. And get this, he has the hold, right? Runner on second. He gets 3 straight outs. And then we go to the bottom of the 8th inning. In the very first pitch of the very first bottom of the 8th inning, Lake Mary, Florida lays down a bunt. And what happens? The pitcher runs over, the first baseman runs in, they throw it to first, and there's nobody covering. The ball goes into right field, and the runner from second scores, and Lake Mary, Florida are champions of the Little League World Series.
That is so great. Just another reminder, Jeff, what a great event that is. Yeah. And this thought that these kids are 12 years old. They are playing for their town, sometimes their city, or their region, or their entire country, and then somehow they find a way to go out and get the job done and perform on national TV with all those people watching. It's just stunning to me. And I just want to thank again Carl Ravitch and Todd Frazier, who made it such a great trip for me, as they always do. And I just want you to know, first off, I asked Todd on the air last week, who does he share a birthday with? And he said Abraham Lincoln, which I'm sorry. I love Todd Frazier more than anyone in the world. He's my new best friend now, but it just struck me as so funny that he and Abraham Lincoln, they both bring us all together. That's Todd's greatest strength. He's the greatest teammate. He brings the booth together. He brings everyone at ESPN together. So he has something in common with Abraham Lincoln, Herb Score, and 7 years ago, our fathers. I just can't think of it anymore without thinking. And by the way, just to show those who didn't see the famous pin that Todd Frazier made for us, me, Ravi, and Todd Frazier, with this incredible pin, which I now have on my desk. But I want you to know, Jeff, something. I went and bought Todd a Walter Johnson sweatshirt. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
He asked me because he thought it was so cool that I went to a high school named after the greatest pitcher of all time. So I got him an extra large, of course, Walter Johnson fleece pullover, which he sent a text to me and showed it to me. So that was a good thing for Todd Frazier and for me.
3 stars you share a birthday with: Bobby Flay, the chef,
right?
Joe Burrow,
right?
the quarterback,
right?
And do you remember Raven Simone from the Disney Channel show That's So Raven?
Yes.
And so you're right up there.
Right. And in that conversation we had with Todd Frazier, we asked Ravi, and he, of course, shares one with Edgar Allan Poe, the Raven. So we have Raven Simone and the Raven. How about that?
Look at that. All right. Well, back to we're all over the place, and I love it. I love this episode already, and I hope people are enjoying it as well. Any more takeaways from Major League Baseball?
All right. Well, Shohei Ohtani, of course, went to 40-40. He's the fewest games ever needed to get to 40 homers, 40 steals. I really believe he's going to hit 50 homers and steal 50 bases. He'll be the first one ever to do that. And of course, he hit his 40th home run, a walk-off grand slam. So classic, so typical of Ohtani. It was his first walk-off homer, and it was a walk-off grand slam for home run number 40 to get him to 40-40. And speaking of 40s and 50s, Aaron Judge, of course, on Sunday got to 50 homers for a third time. He's on a pace to hit 63, and who could question whether he's going to do that? Francisco Lindor of the Mets got to 25 homers, 25 steals. Third time he's done that. The only primary shortstop to have 3 25-25 seasons. Just incredible. The game changer, Jeff, you asked. Joey Votto retired at age 40. And I think he's a Hall of Famer. I don't think he's a first ballot. I don't think he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer, but I'll vote for him on the first ballot. 920 OPS, won an MVP, also finished second, third, and sixth, was a Rookie of the Year, led the league in on-base percentage 7 times, including 4 years in a row. And his career on-base percentage is 25th all time, which is pretty darn high, tied with Jackie Robinson. And the reason he's the game changer, Jeff, is not only was he a great player, but he kind of changed the way we look at the game, because he was one of those guys that really personified and really glorified what an on-base percentage was, because of the times he walked, the times he got on base was just remarkable. But this is the best part of Joey Votto. While he was taking all those walks, he wasn't hitting homers at an exorbitant rate or driving in runs. And finally, people said, Joey, you got to hit more home runs. So he said, okay, you want me to hit more home runs? I will. So in 2021, he hit 36 homers in 448 at-bats. 2 years earlier, he hit 15 homers in 525 at-bats. So this is why he's our game changer. He was able in his mid-30s to say, all right, I've been hitting a certain way for like 20 years. Now I'm going to change it. And not only was he able to change it, he became a great power hitter. Only a great hitter like Joey Votto could do something like that. And that's why I'll vote for him for the Hall of Fame.
And he holds the record for the most games played by a Canadian-born player in Major League Baseball history.
Is that right?
That is 100% true. Yeah, so he holds that record.
By the way, Joey Votto, I saw him in spring training. This is probably 15 years ago. And he was hitting foul balls down the left field line, just purposely hitting balls like over the third base dugout. And he comes out of the cage, and I said, Joey, sorry, what are you doing? And he said, well, there are pitches that I have to learn to fight off. And the best way to do it is just to hit it in foul territory. If I can't put it in play, I want to hit it foul somewhere. And he was practicing hitting foul balls over the third base dugout. That's how much of an art of a magician he was at the plate, and the art of hitting came so important to him. Also, remember, Jeff, 2-3 times a year, he would pop out to an infielder, and that's not an exaggeration. And as I told you a couple of years ago on opening day, he popped out to the pitcher for the first time in his career. And he was like 37 years old before he ever popped out to the pitcher. He was really something, and he was such an interesting character. You know, he learned to speak Spanish. He went to Brazil in the offseason to get a tattoo. He went to Brazil because he heard that's where the best tattoos are made. I said, "What kind of tattoo are you going to get, Joe?" He goes, "Oh, I don't know. I'm going to let the guy decide what tattoo belongs." In other words, he let somebody else put a tattoo on his body.
Wow.
Some guy from Brazil. And I'd love to finish on Joey Votto. He had retired just a day earlier, and somebody asked him, like, "Are you a baseball player?" And he said, "No." Meaning, once you retire, you're no longer a baseball player. It's time to move on to something else. I just think that shows just another side of how deep Joey Votto is.
Let's get to our Kurkjians on Is This a Great Game or What?
All right, this is like an all-time Kurkjian, but everyone knows this Kurkjian, so I'm really not breaking any ground here. But Danny Jansen, yesterday, Monday, played in the same game for two teams. Now, the only way that can happen is on June 26th, his team, Toronto, was playing the Red Sox, and the game was suspended by rain. And he happened to be at the plate with an 0-1 count when the rain came. So the game was rescheduled, the resumption of the game, for Monday, August the 26th. But in the meantime, Danny Jansen got traded to where else? The Red Sox. So now his name is in the box score for the Blue Jays. And then he played in Monday's game. He was the catcher in Monday's game. And the first batter up, of course, is Danny Jansen, but he's not on the Blue Jays, so they had to use a pinch hitter hitting for Danny Jansen, who is now behind the plate for the Boston Red Sox. Never happened before in baseball history. A guy played for two teams in the same game on the same day.
So not only that, but he also technically batted and caught his own at bat.
Right.
Because he was at bat,
right,
and then he was catching the same at bat.
Right.
That's what makes it even more fun for
right.
me.
The only thing that would have made it better is that the game was delayed and suspended with an 0-1 count on Danny Jansen. So therefore, under the baseball rules, the at bat goes to the pinch hitter. If the count had been 0-2, the at bat then goes to Danny Jansen. So if the batter had struck out, the pinch hitter had struck out with an 0-2 count, Danny Jansen would have gotten credit for the strikeout, and he would have been the behind home plate actually catching the strikeout.
So he probably would have been tipping the pitches. He's like, "This
right.
curveball outside."
That's so good. So, of course, I called Danny Jansen to ask him all about this, and he just called the whole thing crazy. He said, "I was really surprised that I was the first one to do this." And he had no idea, after being traded to the Red Sox, that this might happen. Someone alerted him to the possibility. Alex Cora, his manager, told him, "You're going to play because we're here to make history." So Alex understood the history of all this. And I said to Danny, "Are you going to keep the box score from that game? Because your name is going to be in the Toronto box score and the Red Sox box score." And he goes, "Well, I'll keep the box score. I'm also going to ask for the lineup card, the big lineup card, which is going to have his name on both," which is just priceless. Again, this has never happened before in the history of the baseball, but that qualifies as a Kurkjian. The problem is everyone else knows this Kurkjian, not just me.
Yeah, I read it on NPR as well. I had known it before, but when is NPR writing about baseball, right? So the fact that they're picking it up means that everybody's talking about it, but nonetheless, something really, really neat.
But the Danny Jansen story also reminds me of the Joel Youngblood story way before your time, of course, Jeff. August 4th, 1982, Joel Youngblood got a hit for two different teams in two different cities on the same day. And the hits he got off were both off of future Hall of Fame pitchers. So he's playing for the Mets in Chicago. He got a hit off Ferguson Jenkins. At 2:30 in the afternoon, during the game, they told him, you've been traded to Montreal. So he had to change clothes because he was told they need you in Philadelphia tonight. So he barely made his 6 o'clock flight from Chicago to Philly. He got to the airport at 9:05, took his third cab ride of the day. He got to the ballpark, threw his uniform on, and he told me I had been at the ballpark for less than 10 minutes when Jim Fanning, the Expos manager, said, "You're up." And then he went up and got a hit against Steve Carlton, another future Hall of Famer. So I called Joel Youngblood just to hear about this story again. And he said of Danny Jansen, he's trying to take away my record. Well, it's a completely different record. With a laugh, he said, look, I still have the record. I got a hit in two different cities off two different pitchers in the same day for two different teams. He said, no one can match that. And he said, but if I knew at the time it was so important, I would have saved the baseballs from each one. But I didn't have time because I didn't think it would be important. Well, as of today, it's still really important what Joel Youngblood did.
In spirit of Joey Votto, Ferguson Jenkins, another Canadian.
There you go. Way to go.
There it is.
All right, a couple other things. Miguel Amaya became the first Cub to hit a grand slam out of the 9 spot in the order, first since Jim Sundberg in 1987. Jim Sundberg I covered with the Rangers, 82 through, well, a couple of years at least there. And I love Jim Sundberg. Jeff, I've told you the story. You're going to hear it again. Jim Sundberg was catching the ceremonial first pitch from Nolan Ryan when Ryan was 62 years old. And Sundberg, of course, is dressed in his street clothes, but he used to catch Nolan Ryan. So Nolan goes out to the mound for the ceremonial first pitch. He goes to the top of the rubber, and typical Nolan Ryan, he lets it go and he throws it like 85 miles an hour at age 62. And Jim Sundberg, funny guy, told me like he was caught off guard. Like I didn't know he was going to throw it this hard. And he had to crouch real fast to catch it. And he said, when I crouched real quick, I split my pants and I had to walk off the field with my pants split in two. All right, a couple other Kurkjians that will go. Blake Snell had an amazing line the other day. 3 innings pitched, no hits, 2 runs, both earned, 6 walks, 5 strikeouts, 3-0, 2-2-6-5. So I called John from the Elias and said, John, seriously, I've never seen this line before. So Dylan Cease in 2020 had a very similar line. Hideo Nomo in 1995 had a very similar line. But those are the only other 2 pitchers in history to pitch at least just 3 innings, maybe 4, no hits allowed, a couple runs, a bunch of walks, a bunch of strikeouts. That is how weird that box score line was. I mean, nobody gets taken out with a no-hitter after 3 innings, but Blake Snell was all over the place, so they took him out. Last thing, and you know how much I love at-bats between pitchers and batters. So the other day we had Alex Call of the Nationals against Chris Sale. So we had a Sale Call at bat. So I guess this is for all salesmen. You can also call that a tremendous stretch, Jeff, a Sale Call at bat. Yes or no? Stretch? Terrible? What?
No, I think sales call. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Right. Well,
but remember what Michael Scott always used to say, ABC, always be closing. That's what he would always say to his salesman, ABC. I love Michael Scott. What about this date in baseball?
All right, we had a couple great birthdays. We had Buddy Bell was born today, and Buddy Bell's one of my favorite people of all time, Jeff. One of my favorite players. Sorry, we're not allowed to have favorites. But 1982, I started covering the Texas Rangers. I was like 14 years old. I had no idea what I was doing as far as covering a team. I knew the game, I knew the players, but I didn't know how to cover a team. And Buddy, who treats the clubhouse kid as well as he treats the owner of the team, really took good care of me and made sure that I didn't get lost in the shuffle. And I'll always remember that. Buddy just personifies what it is to be a professional baseball player. And Craig Biggio once told me that he learned what Major League Baseball is all about when he was a teammate with Buddy Bell for Buddy's final season, this one with the Astros. And they had a doubleheader. And Buddy's in his late 30s, and he's in the trainer's room in between games of a doubleheader, getting a needle in his knee so he can go out and play the second game of the doubleheader. He played both games of the doubleheader, and that's when Craig Biggio, one of the great tough guys ever, recognized how the game is supposed to be played when he saw Buddy Bell doing that. Also, Jim Thomey's birthday today. Jim Thomey, one of the nice guys who ever played the sport, hit over 600 home runs. And I'll never forget, Jim Thomey grew up as a big Cubs fan. And somehow, like right before the start of a major league game, Jim Thomey was like 9 years old. Somehow, he crawled his way onto the field right before the game and got into the Cubs dugout and just wanted to go up and say hello to his Cub hero, Dave Kingman. He was 9 years old. The game's going to start in like 3 minutes. Finally, security came along and said, "Son, you can't be in here." But Jim Thomey made it into the clubhouse to say hi to Dave Kingman as a 9-year-old, his favorite Cub.
And it's so important to hear those stories, Jim Thomey, Hall of Famer, because the way he treated fans, he recognized he was a fan back when he was a kid. And so he treats fans the way he, as a fan, would have wanted to be treated, which I think is so special.
Of course, of course. All right, Jeff, the Kurkjian quandary this week is related to Dan Shaughnessy, okay?
Okay.
Because Dan, as we will discuss more later, Dan is not just a Hall of Fame baseball player, but he covers all sports as a columnist in Boston, okay? So he covers the Celtics, the Bruins, the Patriots, and the Red Sox, of course. He's a baseball guy through and through, which is why he's on this podcast. But he has seen some of the greatest players. So our quandary this week, Jeff, is we're just going to use the 4 major sports. And if I offend anyone with this, sorry. But the 4 major sports to me are hockey, basketball, baseball, and football. And I maintain that Boston has the best collection of best player in each sport. In hockey, of course, it's Bobby Orr. Baseball, it's Ted Williams. Basketball, it's Bill Russell or Larry Bird. I would take Bill Russell, even though nobody loves Larry Bird more than I do. And in football, of course, it's Tom Brady. So the question for all our viewers out there is there another city that has a better foursome picking one player in each sport? Have you given this any thought, Jeff? Because I have.
This is tough because Boston is amazing, but once you get into like Chicago, I mean, Michael Jordan is the GOAT, right?
Right.
And then I'm going to make a slight argument here for my friends in Cleveland because you've got LeBron James, you've got Jim Brown, and those two, arguably, some say LeBron James is the GOAT. You've got 2 out of there. Pick a Cleveland Indians / Guardians player.
Bob Feller.
Bob Feller.
Who's your hockey player, Jeff? That's the problem.
That's the thing.
Jeff,
you don't have
the
a
problem
hockey
is,
guy.
right.
That's true.
You look at San Francisco. San Francisco has got Willie Mays, Joe Montana, and an early Wilt Chamberlain, but they don't have a soccer player. Or you could go Willie Mays, Joe Montana, Steph Curry, but who's the hockey player? Look, I don't know anything about hockey. How about New York, Jeff? New York has got Babe Ruth, Mark Messier, Lawrence Taylor, and Patrick Ewing, who I think might be the best New York Knick, but we're not sure about that. So if anyone has another team, I mean, like LA has Wayne Gretzky, Magic Johnson, Sandy Koufax, Deacon Jones, the great defensive end. So we're going to leave this up to our viewers. All I'm saying is I think Boston has the best Mount Rushmore of players for each sport. And I think it's a quandary because I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think there are a lot of cities that make a really good argument.
Make your argument, greatgameorwhat.com. You can chime in there. Obviously, I'm a little biased. I did spend quite a few years, my first years of my career, doing radio in Cleveland, Ohio.
I grew up in Maryland, so Washington, D.C. is 20 minutes away. They got Walter Johnson. Did I ever tell you I went to Walter Johnson High School?
Only every week.
All right. Sammy Baugh, one of the great quarterback kickers of all time. Alex Ovechkin and Wes Unseld. Pretty darn group in Washington, too. Pretty darn good.
You know, Dad, you mentioned that actually you were watching my niece and nephew, your grandchildren there in Maryland. That's because the aforementioned Kelly and Mark, who I not so nicely attacked for not having cable in their home. Sorry, I have to apologize because they listen to every week, so I'm going to hear it from them. But they're in Paris right now, and that's why you were watching their kids. And I don't want to get inside baseball, but you basically texted me and said, just ask me, because I asked you about a best of all, Tim. Do we have one this week? And you said, just bring up Kelly in Paris. And that's all I know. So what is the team?
Wait. First off, we have to clarify it's Paris, France, okay? Right. Because, Jeff, a friend of mine at the Dallas Morning News, a senior writer at the Dallas Morning News, wrote in the paper that the International Grand Prix was meeting at its headquarters in Paris, and one of the editors changed it to Paris, Texas. That is the worst edit I've ever seen. I love editors. They're crucial. I can't live without them. So it's Paris, France, Jeff. So in honor of Kelly Kurkjian and her husband, Mark Keenahan, I thought I would come up with the baseball players in the cities of the world. Okay. And we're doing this on purpose in a slightly different order. Our pitching staff includes Paul Moscow.
Very good.
Don Florence, Alex Madrid, John Neese, Jose Lima, and from the United States, Orlando Hernandez, since so many people go to Orlando, Florida for Disney. The outfield is Claudel Washington, Darrell Boston, and Clyde Milan. I had to look that one up. Didn't know who he was. Our catcher is Benito Santiago.
Chile, yeah.
Right. I always say Chile, which is so wrong. Tyler Austin, and I fudged this one because I just love his name, Larry Milbourne, even though Melbourne with an I would have been a much better. Miguel Cairo is our shortstop, and our third baseman is Kelly Paris.
No.
Yes, and your sister Kelly is in Paris at the moment. So that was
spectacular.
That was the impetus behind using the Kelly going pitcher, outfield, infield. So the kicker at the end was Kelly Paris.
Excellent job, Dad. That is great.
So
I have some kind of breaking news. So we are recording this virtually, and our friends at Stratomatic, Dad, have just sent me our simulation that we had. Is this a great sim or what? That's what they call it, by the way. Is this a great sim or what? From our friends at Stratomatic, the market leader in sports simulation. So, Dad, the age-old question, and you and I debate it all the time, right? Contact versus power, especially in this day and age, in this world where everyone's trying to hit home runs. You and I were talking together while we were at the Little League World Series and thought to ourselves, who would win in a game? The all Kyle Schwarber team, low batting average, but high power hitter, right?
And on base percentage, walks 100 times. Really good player, not the point. Right.
On base percentage guy. Or the all Luis Arraez team, all contact all day, high batting average. And that's always been the debate, contact versus power. So here's what I set up with our friends at Stratomatic, Dad, and I'm so excited about this one. They took this to the next level. They put 9 Luis Arraezes and 9 Kyle Schwarbers on the same team. Then they simulated a 162 game season. Now, I want to make sure they're not playing in the field. Okay, that's not important to this. We're simply thinking offense. So, Dad, 162 games, and they all played against the same pitchers and defensive settings as well. 75% right-handers, 25% left-handed pitchers. And I cannot wait. This is the first time you're hearing this of the summary. 162. Now, Dad, they came up with a record for each team. Tell me, who do you think had the better record?
I'm going to say, based on all the times that Kyle Schwarber reaches base with his walks and hits the ball out of the ballpark, I'm going to say 9 Kyle Schwarbers beat 9 Luis Arises.
And you would be incorrect.
Wow.
But it was close. Team Arise finished 82-80. Team Schwarber finished 80-82.
Jeff, this is why we hired, this is why we brought in Stratomatic to help us with this, because we ask all these questions. Would a team full of 9 Gold Glovers beat a team full of 9 DHs? Doesn't matter what the Gold Glovers hit, that type of thing. Those are the kind of questions that keep me up at night, and this is so beautiful. So it just proves again that even though Kyle Schwarber hits for a relatively low average, he is a really good offensive player. And even though Luis Ariz doesn't drive in a ton of runs or hit the ball out of the ballpark or walk a lot, he's still a really good baseball player. And that's all we're trying to prove here.
Team Arise batted .306. Team Schwarber batted .206.
Oh, my gosh.
Team Arise, 783 runs scored. Team Schwarber, 767, 16-run difference, runs scored on the season. But here's the crazy number. Team Schwarber, 438 home runs. That's an average. That's an average of 48.6 per player on Team Schwarber. But get this, they struck out 1,503 times. 1,500 strikeouts.
Oh,
that's
my God.
Unbelievable.
That is so good, Jeff. I'm so glad that we got this on time, and thank you, Stratomatic, for all of this. I love it. They hit by far more home runs than any team ever has in one season, and of course, the strikeout rate is just ridiculous. So
it's insane.
But we have to repeat, Jeff. It was a compliment to Kyle Schwarber and a compliment to Luis Ariz that we chose both of those guys, because even though they approach the game differently, they're both really good.
If you have a suggestion for a Stratomatic simulation you want us to do, you can chime in, greatgamerwhat.com. Visit our website, and you can check that out. Dan Shaughnessy is our guest this week. I'm so excited.
Yeah, and Jeff, as I've said already, Dan was my mentor in the business. And the reason he's so good, he's one of the great baseball writers ever, Hall of Famer. And he's the most fearless columnist out there. He does not care who gets angry with him. He is absolutely fearless. The truth will set him free, is how he puts it. So he used to cover Celtics, and on a plane flight once, Scott Wedman, really good shooting forward for the Celtics. His wife, Scott Wedman's wife, came up to Dan Shaughnessy on an airplane and said, "God, I hate you." And then she paused and she said, "God, are you a great writer?" And that's all that matters to Dan Shaughnessy. It's not the first part. He doesn't care if you like him. It only matters that you respect him as a great writer, and he is a great writer.
We had a chance to talk to him in person for this interview. It's coming up next.
Welcome back to Is This a Great Game or What? And we're joined by Dan Shaughnessy, Hall of Fame baseball writer,
columnist for the Boston Globe, and my mentor in this business. Dan, thank you so much. Me and Jeff are doing our own podcast. How great is that?
Unbelievable. We're here, I can't believe where we are and where we're doing this, looking out at the lake, Otis.
Wait, isn't this so perfect?
What a set. This is amazing.
The view we have. Now, my dad has told me that I have to open this up with when you introduced him to Earl Weaver. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, it was your first time being a reporter coming up to the field.
Right. I was learning from Dan, so Dan took me with him to go learn the ropes.
We were standing, Earl was by the cage, brought him out behind the cage where Earl was standing during BP. Hey, Earl, this is young Tim Kurkjian. He's going to be joining us today. What did Earl say to you?
Earl said, you, Tim.
A big icebreaker.
And then he walked away.
And I said, oh, and Earl, Tim's first assignment, I thought I'd make something real easy. He was going to do a sidebar on Doug DeCinces, who everybody hated, and hated everybody, but he loved to talk about himself. And Earl said, oh, great, Tim, Doug DeCinces, Doug's going to love you because you're going to show interest in him and make him tell him his story. But the other 24 guys are going to hate you. So you're talking to Doug.
Well, after Earl F-bombed me, Dan looks at me and goes, oh, that's what he does to all the guys that he likes. I met him 15 seconds earlier, and he's already F-bombing me. The other thing, so I learned everything from Dan. He's the guy that showed me the ropes. So, Dan, the first time I brought my score sheet, like on a big legal pad, I scratched out my score sheet. Do you remember what you said to me?
No.
You said, you got to go get yourself a score book. You can't use a legal pad to be drawing all this stuff. It was such a great reminder that I better do things professionally from the beginning.
And then I have a recollection of you having a San Francisco Giants scorebook.
Yeah, it was bad, Dan. I was a huge Giants fan at the time, and the minute I started covering baseball, and I mean this, thanks to you, I threw away my allegiance to the Giants because I realized this is a raging conflict of interest I can't do.
Yeah, that happened. Yeah, well, you worked out pretty good. Way to go.
Yeah. So thanks to you, by the way. Yeah. Instead of writing a legal pad and drawing his own scorecards, now he's a Hall of Fame baseball writer like yourself.
And I was going to Rochester, New York to take a job, Jeff, to cover RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I was going to go do their hockey and football team or something. And Dan, I was at the Washington Star. He said, Tim, you can't go. Can't go. It's not a better job. You need to stay here in Washington, and it turned out.
Yeah, go there, and they'll forget about you. Better be doing small stuff in a big market, which worked out for you. And one of your early stories, I still remember your line when Dave made you go to the tryouts. Have you told that story in your podcast?
No, I haven't. Do you remember it?
Yes, because they had you at short. You were lined up with all the shortstops, taking grounders. Everybody goes to the open tryout. It was the Orioles, right?
Yes.
And they'll sign one guy, whatever. They never signed it. Nothing ever comes of it. But everybody's fired up, going to go try out for the Orioles. And what convinced you that you were not the worst player?
Well, Jeff, I'm taking ground balls at a tryout to get signed to play in the Orioles system. Of course, everyone there thought if you got signed, you were going to play for the Orioles tomorrow. We had to explain that's not what this is about. So I am taking ground balls, and I am not making this up. The guy next to me, Dan, is wearing loafers. So he's wearing dress shoes, and he's wearing a dress shirt, much like the one I have now, buttoned down at the front like this. He came to a tryout camp dressed in good shoes and a dress shirt
and Jordache jeans.
Yes, and
I knew I wasn't the worst guy when the guy next to me was wearing Jordache jeans. I said, "This kid's pretty good. At least we should let him do some sidebars."
And just to show you how clueless those poor kids were at that thing. Afterwards, a guy comes up to me and he says, "So, what happened?" And I said, "They signed me." And he goes, "I knew they would. I knew you were really good," which was absolutely ridiculous. And just to finish the story, I don't think I ever told you this. I was the first guy to bat in this little inter-squad game, and they had brought a kid in from Pennsylvania, a high school kid, and I'm like 24 years old. They bring in a high school kid, and he's the one guy they want to watch, and I'm the first guy to bat against him. Dan, I'm not making this up. Before he crosses the line to walk to the mound, he does a backflip. And I think, oh, my God, he's throwing 90 miles an hour, and he's out of his mind, and I have to face him at age 24. I swung at the first pitch. The ball lodged in the mud in front of home plate. No one could get it out, and I actually got a hit because I was too afraid to stay in there longer than one pitch, so I swung. I actually hit it into the ground, and I got a knock.
Have you told your hitting story about hitting off Bob Feller?
I
We have
have,
told
but
that story.
no, but I want
slow
you
down.
to tell it again because you think it's the greatest story ever.
Well, he was just a cranky old bastard. No matter where you went. I mean, I remember I loved him because he would always talk, but he was crabby, and it was always everybody was better in my day, and the whole thing. We were better than these guys, and why can't they go 11 innings and the usual? And I remember he came to the Ted Williams Hitter Museum, and Ted could draw people. This swing was in, horrible middle of Florida, Hernando, Florida, dreadful. I mean, DiMaggio got there, and he's looking around like, what am I doing here? And Muhammad Ali was there, this was something you'd notice if you had Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, and Muhammad Ali in the room. Muhammad Ali was the biggest figure in the room. It just shows you the gravitas that he had and how big he was. Bob Feller was not particularly pleased to see Muhammad Ali there because he was a draft dodger. He could not get that. I thought he was going to go for him at the cocktail hour. It was like all he could see was this guy had not stood up for the US of A and draft dodger, the whole thing like that. So, and just not a gracious guy, but a hilarious guy, and great. And he obviously served his country in World War II and missed parts of his career and all that. And but later on, when he's making money, barnstorming, and trying to make up for all the money he wasn't making compared to today's young guys making all this money, which made him bitter, part of his barnstorming was to go around and pitch to dopes like us in just batting practice, and then you got a certificate. I hit off Bob Feller. And when Tim got his, he noticed the fine print. Take it away,
Right.
Tim.
The aforementioned slugger realizes if he had faced Mr. Feller at his prime, the results would have been different.
No kidding.
Yeah, I would have lit him up in 1940.
One of my favorite stories that we heard on the podcast was actually from Lindsay Berra, Yogi Berra's granddaughter, who Yogi was so quiet about his service to this country that Bob Feller wouldn't talk to him because he didn't know he served the country.
Wow.
So she told us that. And another player, no, Yogi served. He just doesn't talk about that time in his life because it was so important to him and it was so humble.
That's
and
good.
We got chills when we had Lindsay
never
Berra
heard
on the
that.
show.
That's
That was a
typical.
really
Everybody's-
neat story.
that's
I wanted
spot
to
on.
ask you, though, being that we are a father-son podcast, and obviously we talk about baseball, but your son is so important to you, and you wrote an entire book about
did.
a home run your
Tell us
son hit.
what was the impetus to write the book about Sam Shaughnessy?
Well, I think, both of Sam's oldest sisters played ball, and they all played a little bit in college. But the high school thing, I loved high school ball myself, and having your youngest, and he was a good high school player, and having him, I knew I was going to be sad when it was over, so I just kind of kept a journal, and it was a way for me to tell all my old stories, and sort of a, universal truths of parenting and then and now. So I'm telling stories from the 60s about myself and growing up in a small town, and then fast forwarding to what it's like now. So I just was able to bring out all those stories. But I remember I was provoked, I was waiting for a game to end in one of his extra inning games in high school, and I had to get out to a wake for my my cousin's son, who was very sad, drug overdose and all this stuff, and I was just really sad about going out there. And I was hanging because the game wasn't over, and Sam had this box Toyota Corolla out beyond the fence in right field where the school parking lot was, and I was parked near it, and finally it was, I don't know, 9th, 10th inning, whatever, but he hit a walk-off, and it hit the car. It hit the shit box, so it was a walk-off, drive-off, and I drove off as soon as I saw him go around the bases. I got the hell out to the wake out in Central Mass, but yeah, I think John Lowe might have come up with that walk-off, drive-off. He hit his own car.
Dan, what was it like to watch Sam play baseball at Boston College? He was a good hitter.
He had one good year at BC. He led the team in on-base percentage, and they had like 6 or 7 guys who got drafted. 3 or 4 of them played in the big leagues. Eric Campbell played for the Mets, and the catcher was 4th pick in the country, Tony Sanchez. And they had a lot of guys like him, left-handed hitters who were bigger than him in most cases. So, but in the year he played, he had 2 doubles off Matt Harvey, and he played summer ball, and Strasburg was just coming up, and he hit against Strasburg. It's a polite word for what he did, but he batted against Strasburg, and Sam always wanted to jack everything, and he hit a foul ball. He fouled one back, which was a major triumph. And then Strasburg had him 0-2 and threw him a changeup, and Sam almost threw the bat and down right field. I mean, it was just, he was so ahead of it, because he was so geared up for that. But yeah, it was fun, and later on to just see these guys go to the major leagues and then remember that he had a moment against them. He had 3 home runs in a high school game. And my brother was a really good player. My brother played in the Cape League, played for Orleans, and when my son hit 3 home runs in a high school tournament game, which was a game changer for him, my brother came up to him and goes, "Oh, Sam, nice job with those 3 homers. I only did that twice." I'm like, "You asshole." It's like, who says that?
So, Dan, my grandfather grew up in Boston, my dad's dad, and we still have a lot of Kurkjians in Watertown, Massachusetts. But what was it like, Ted Williams, in that town, and meeting Ted Williams and getting to have, a working relationship, so to speak?
Well, as Tim knows, Ted didn't think a lot of our profession, the writers. He grew to be much nicer in his old age. So I was lucky. He and I, I'm sure, would have hated each other if I'd covered him. It's like me and David Ortiz, or me and Pedro, or Manny, or whatever. It wasn't always good to know Mar. But the fact that he was an old guy and I was young, even though he could say writer like a four-letter word, he had a very soft spot for children with cancer because there was a lot of it around him, and he was a pioneer of the Jimmy Fund. He knew Dr. Sidney Farber, who got things going, and when my daughter was diagnosed in 1993 with leukemia, she was 8 years old, and she's in the hospital one day, and I didn't know Ted. I had, right here in this Otasaga one time, I sat at his table. They'd have tables the day after the induction. You could sit at DiMaggio's table, Feller's table, and I took the Ted table, and no one dared say a word. He sat down at that table, and everybody looked, and no one wanted to. And he said, "Scared to death, aren't you?" And we were, and it was just, so that's how you were around him. But when my daughter was sick, the phone rang in the hospital, and she was in the early days of treatment. It was a 2-year protocol for treatment. And knock on wood, things came out great. She has 3 little boys now. But in those moments, everybody's scared to death, and it was just a bomb of news. And she said, "Daddy, there's a loud man on the phone telling me I'm going to be okay." And she didn't know who he was. He identified himself, and she passed the receiver over to me and said, "Oh, your little girl, you tell her. I knew Dr. Farber, and damn it, we always said he could cure these kids, and he's going to find a way, and damn it, he'll do it. And you tell her I'll come up and see her, and I hope she becomes a ball player, and I heard she likes to hit." And after that, I just put a call through, and I could always get him, because he'd say, "How's Kate? Can she hit? How's it going?" And she did. She played high school softball. She walked on at BU, played a little bit. And she's been a coach ever since. But she had this relationship. And the day he died, she was working at the Twin Souvenir Shop, because near Cross Street in Fenway, and she had a Ted authentic jersey, and she wore it, not knowing that Ted was going to die that day. And then she was wearing it in the shop when she learned that he died. And we did an event with Gammons on the field. They had 20,000 fans come out for Ted, and she was on the field giving a tribute back to him. And he did come up to meet her. She met him at the 99 All-Star game. We went to the hotel. We took pictures and talked about hitting. And when you talked about hitting with Ted, he was sleepy then, and he was really in and out. But when you start talking about hitting, he would rise up, and then he asked for a pad of paper, and he drew all these, he always wanted the uppercut because the mound's higher than you are, and it's coming this way, and you need to be going this way. And it was all geometry to him, and the whole get a good pitch to hit and all that. But we were lucky that we had a family relationship because he had a soft spot for children with cancer.
Right. 99 All-Star game, Dan. That's my favorite All-Star game because of Pedro, but mostly because of the pregamer with Ted. You agree?
There was so much going on that night, it's hard to reconstruct it. But I know that, there was a Marine group from Vermont to do the flyover, and they were trying to show off to Ted because he was a pilot, and he liked that sort of thing. And they showed off. They buzzed the tower. They buzzed Fenway and then broke windows in the back bay. They got in trouble, because they knew they were going to see him afterwards. And they did. They got to go up they're the Green Mountain Boys or something. It's a famous military flying group up there. And so they had an audience with him. And your dad and I have talked, Matt Damon was newly famous. And Matt's dad was a hitting coach at my son's high school. And Kent Damon, who's passed away since. And they had an audience with Ted. And Good Will Hunting was fresh, and he's an Oscar winner, and he's like 26. And, Matt played a little. And when Matt got into Ted's lounge up there, and he said, "Mr. Williams, I read your book." He goes, "Yeah? What's the most important thing in that book?" He said, "Get a good pitch to hit." "All right, then you're all right." So he's hugging him, and after that, If you knew the answer to that, you were good. He would light up.
Dan, how lucky are you to have grown up in the Boston area and you either saw or covered, Bobby Orr, Bill Russell, Tom Brady, Ted Williams, all these
Larry
guys.
Bird.
Larry Bird, right, of course, the best of them all.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you as a sports writer to be a part of that legacy in Boston?
I mean, Boston's Rushmore. If you took one from every sport, it could be the best guy in that sport. Bobby Orr, Bill Russell, Ted Williams,
Tom Brady.
I think, you can make a case. No city can do that. Right. And again, we had all the success we had in this century. We've had 13 championship parades, and all 4 teams won a championship in a span of 6 years and 4 months. And I was at every one of those things. So, yeah, really privileged to that, and to get to know these guys, and able to have them in your cell phone and hopefully get them and like that. Yes. I mean, these were my boyhood idols in some cases. In some cases, you become almost their age, but yeah, we've had the greatest of the greats. We have.
Dan, question, and I know both of you Hall of Fame baseball writers. So as I went to school to study journalism, now I'm a country radio host. So I'm not, trying to hit deadline and do all of that. I've heard so many great stories from my dad of showing up to interview a potential coach, and they think he's the paper boy, not the journalist, or trying to get the story in time. Do you have any great deadline stories or funny, boots on the ground?
Well, I mean, again, things weren't always all rosy in Boston, and I learned the art of doing things quickly. This is part of when you have to be professional and not be a fan and not be emotional. It's like if you bet on the game, you're so pissed off that the call didn't go your way or it went the other way. And in our case, having a story ready, 1986, they're going to win the World Series in New York. I mean, it's 5-3 in the bottom of the 10th, 2 outs, nobody on. You can't lose that game. And so I'm writing the Dave Henderson statue story. He hit the home run at the top of the 10th. He had rescued them in Anaheim when they were down. So it's going to be all Dave Henderson. But it's Saturday night, and it's the night you turn the clocks back. And he had hit the Newsday sign at 11:59. It was this great, had all this stuff ready. And the Red Sox, 68 years, they're going to win the World Series. You can't lose this game. While I'm composing this, Knight singles, Mitchell singles, Carter was first. Carter, Mitchell, Knight. Then and then they bring the steamer in, and all of Boston shrieks, and then there's the wild pitch, pass ball, and then Mookie, the jackknife on the spitter, and then, behind the bag, Vin Scully. And I mean, so you just vaporize that Henderson column, and now you're writing, spitting out pieces of your broken luck here. Now you've got to flip that very quickly. So I was practiced in that, and fast forward to 2003. Pedro's got the 5-2 lead in the 8th inning in Yankee Stadium. That's over, but they stayed too long. The hits start rattling around, and so they're going to win the pennant on Yankee soil after 85 years, and you're ready with that. And then all this stuff happens. So you got to be able to quickly, those are the deadline things I remember. The Tuck game, that was a Saturday night. It's always Saturday night with this stuff, And in newspapers, that was deadly. Because and Saturday night with a foot of snow and Brady fumbles, the kid from Michigan caused the fumble. And that's it. Okay, this was a nice little run here. They didn't make it. Same old Patriots. And then Walt Coleman comes forward through the snow and says, wait, the Tuck rule. No, a dynasty built on a lie.
Right.
They end up winning 5 more, but they lost that game on a fumble. What's the kid's name from Michigan? He's in the Hall of Fame. He was the
football player?
Yeah. He tackled Tom. He caused the fumble.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, the Oakland Raider.
I'll get it in a minute.
Yeah.
But anyway, so so being able to change your mind quickly and go from the greatest high to the lowest low, or in some cases went the other way a couple times later on.
So Dan, this podcast is a tribute to my father. Ultimately, that's why we have a father-son. My dad, who went to MIT undergrad, PhD in mathematics, grew up in Watertown. He was born in 1918.
Wow. And
he died in 2003. So he was alive for 86 years and never saw the Red Sox win. Yeah. I mean, doesn't that personify, at least at one point, what Red Sox fans were all about?
That was real. That's why when they won in 2004, it's still the greatest sports story of all time. It's biblical. and people going to grave sites and putting things in cemetery on gravestones and flowers, and the parade, which went into the water. Then they used the duck boats on the water. They had the amphibious thing going, so they go down Boylston Street and then down the Charles River, and Stan Grossfeld got there's a shot in the back of one of my books. It's like the guy's in the water. It looks like, he's in Jerusalem or something. He's like arms out. He's knee deep in the Charles River with the Sox thing on. They finally won. I mean, it was just, and there was millions of people. It was the largest celebration in New England. And of all the stories I've done, the games themselves weren't, except for, games 4 and 5 of the ALCS, they weren't really epic. But beating the Yankees after everything that had happened, it was the greatest sports story ever.
Dan, tell us about Larry Bird. Tell us your favorite. You know how much I love basketball. You love basketball. Tell us a Larry Bird story that maybe Jeffrey hasn't heard yet.
Well, I mean, you were there for a lot of it. He and I had a bad year the last year. Deep down, he liked me, but when I wrote about his barroom fight, he didn't like that. He said he wouldn't talk to me all year. And he kept it going right up to the All-Star game, which was in Dallas. It was the first three-point contest. For Larry Bird, $10,000 for 10 minutes of shooting, that just, his head exploded.
Right.
How great that was, because that's all he cared about was money. And so, that's when he walks into the room and asks the other 7 guys, which one of you guys are going to come in second? One of them became an official. He was a Sixers guard there. Yeah. I forget his name, but it was so devastated. And he goes out and wins that one. And you were in the room. He came into the winners, I'm the 3-point king. He just keeps saying, I'm the 3-point king.
And then he looks at Dan Shaughnessy, who hadn't spoken to in a year, and he goes, go put that in your newspaper, Shaughnessy.
He did. It was like, it just made him so happy. And he had taken bets with his teammates, because those guys, they had a lot of marksmen, Wedman, Seasting, Ainge. They had long range, that's why they would have held up so well today. And there were a lot of bets. They all wanted to go. He got to go. And he took bets, and then he had one of those little books. And when the next game was in Sacramento after the All-Star break, and he was outside the team bus, getting his money. He said, "Oh, you can go back up to your room," Then like he was checking off who owed him what. He just loved taking your money.
Right. Tell Jeffrey, who's a music guy, about the discussion you had on the bus that day with Larry.
Well, that was in Dallas also. It was the atrium of the old Hyatt Regency, which was attached to the Reunion Arena. It was great. In 1985, November 85, Celtics had this weird thing. They had 2 days off in Dallas. There had been a game, it must have been San Antonio, and we got to Dallas. We were off Sunday and Monday, playing Tuesday against the Mavericks. That's a lot of time off the NBA. You're never in a hotel that long. So we're in the atrium. I was drinking with Peter May. It's a dead-ass Sunday, and there's a show next door that night, unbeknownst to us. So we're just having beers, and Bird and Buckner came by just to break balls. They would see us and just come by, hopefully get free drinks and break balls. So they sit down, make themselves at home. I think they had their sweats on, coming from playing and shooting. And so we're just shooting the shit. And then the gates open to Reunion Arena, and like 1,000 young people come streaming through for the concert. And Larry says, "What's that all about?" I said, "Oh, Springsteen's playing there tonight." And he goes, "Who's that?" I said,
No.
Bruce Springsteen. He says, "Yeah, Rick Springfield?" I said, No. Bruce Springsteen, you dope." He goes, I never heard of the guy. I said, "Well, put it this way. Think of him as the U of rock and roll." He goes, "Oh, he must be pretty good then." And that's a true story. And so McHale was friends with the guitarist, Lofgren, who's from you guys.
Right, Nils
Maryland.
Lofgren went to Walter Johnson, where I went.
Maryland guy.
Right.
And somehow he knew Kevin, and Kev left us tickets, and Larry went over, and we saw him game night. And what'd you think? Because Springsteen played Sunday and Monday, and Kev left us tickets for Monday. And saw him at the arena. Larry always say the gym for Tuesday's game. I said, "Did you go to the show?" "Yeah, I went." "What'd you think?" I left at intermission or halftime, whatever they call it." He said, "That's not my kind of music." He said, "But he sweats a lot, and I like that."
Right.
He liked the work ethic. That meant something.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. This is my mentor. This is my dear friend. And to do a podcast with me and my son is a thrill of a lifetime, believe me.
Really cool. Thank you, guys.
Dan.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you so
me.
much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan Shaughnessy. That was we laughed so hard with him. He is so great. And for having such a hard-nosed job, being a writer in Boston, and he takes no crap from anybody. He is a funny guy, and I loved being witness of your relationship. But the thing we didn't get when the mics were on, because we had finished, we had broken down, we shook hands, and he says, hey, and let me know when that episode's going to run, because I'll tweet it out. I have 90,000 Twitter followers, and they all hate me. And I was dying that we didn't have the mics on, but we'd already packed up at that point.
It's okay. Dan doesn't care if you hate him, as long as you read him and respect him. And everybody reads him, and most people, if not all, respect him.
Dan Shaughnessy, thank you for being our guest. Next week, we have a major league player. I'm going to leave it at that, Dad. I want to tease that a current major league pitcher is going to be joining us on the show, who not only can throw really, really hard, but also has a incredible mind. That's all I'm going to say.
Right. I can honestly say, Jeff, his IQ is yours and mine combined. That's
and
what
his
I
height, too,
and
probably. And his arm strength. We
Yes.
put our fastballs together. He would beat us all in 3.
Yes, all good.
All right, join us next week. Tell a friend about Is This a Great Game or What? Don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button. It's completely free to listen to our podcast. Thank you for listening. And as always, thank you for being a part of our family.